Income and wealth inequality are desirable. For the purposes of this blog post, U refers to those in favor of policies designed to redistribute income and/or wealth. Income inequality shouldn't be viewed as a prima facie wrong. It is the natural result of a free market. Indeed, perfect income inequality could only be achieved by coercion. As long as people have different preferences from each other and are free to act in their own interests, there will always be both income and wealth inequality. And that's a good thing. If someone is paranoid without a massive rainy day fund, we shouldn't force him to spend to reduce wealth inequality, nor should we restrain a 31-year-old who is terminally ill from spending down his savings in his final days. If we want freedom, we need to be comfortable with the inequality it results in. Would any of us really want those working the most dangerous, dirty, and untimely jobs to be paid the same as those doing menial tasks in an air-conditioned office? Obviously not. Nor would we want to force everyone to work the same number of hours or enter and leave the workforce at the same age. Likewise, it would be hard to justify forcing people to take on risky ventures without the compensatory reward. And if we wouldn't force people to take on such ventures, how could we expect them to do so voluntarily without the proportionate upside which necessarily results in income inequality? So clearly, income inequality isn't bad on its face, but you say the amount of inequality we have now is artificial and therefore must be corrected. To some extent, I would agree. There are some instances where supernormal profits are made as a consequence of government intervention in the free market, such as restricting competition that would otherwise decrease the profits for a particular business, sector, or group of employees. However, this is in principle an argument for less government intervention, not more. I also doubt the government can fix the portion of inequality it created without starting a never-ending cycle where every group will claim they were disadvantaged and demand their own compensation. And so the best response to the artificial inequality that was created by government intervention may simply be to recognize the error and eliminate whatever law or policy was privileging one interest over another. There will, of course, be some residual artificial inequality, but unfortunately, we may simply have to live with that as the best option available. Then there is the inequality that is not created by government intervention, but which arises naturally from free men acting in free markets. This inequality is not artificially created, and so the burden of proof is on the accuser to identify how natural inequality is evidence of wrongdoing. If there is no wrongdoing, coercive redistribution by the state should be treated as unjustified. To argue otherwise is to say that I have a right to the fruits of your labor simply because I earn less. This justification would lead to a society that legally enforces perfect income equality, a horrendous idea as mentioned earlier. To play devil's advocate, I'll offer up what I think some people may believe is evidence of wrongdoing. I'm going to try not to strawman here, but it may come across that way simply due to the absence of forward thinking in the redistributionist position. Number 1. The rich have an ethical obligation to give to the poor. Since income inequality exists, it means the rich did not give enough to the poor, and thus committed a moral wrong to be corrected by government redistribution. An obvious issue with this argument is that the first premise is contested. Does the individual with a higher income, because his job has worse working conditions, have an obligation to give money to the individuals who work in better conditions but for less pay? What if the individual with the higher income actually worked for the same wage, but just worked more hours? Is he still obligated to give his income to the part-timer? Okay, not in those cases, you may say, but what about the kid who inherited his wealth and is just earning interest on the capital while he sits poolside? Surely he isn't benefiting the economy more than the plumber, electrician, or nurse, right? While I would certainly prefer the kid not rest on his father's laurels, the reality is that the ability for people to earn high income simply from interest on investments is actually profoundly beneficial to the economy, since it incentivizes savings, leading to capital investment. If all investment income were redistributed, then no one would invest, which means people would either consume more or simply hold savings for a rainy day without actually investing them to earn interest. Either way, there would be a reduction in capital formation, which is bad for the economy. And if you significantly taxed inheritance, you likewise incentivize consumption by the elderly as opposed to savings and investment. So as much as we both may hate, for different reasons, seeing 23-year-old trust fund kids sitting poolside at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday, we'll have to grin and bear it for prosperity's sake. Number 2. All employee-employer relationships are inherently exploitative because of the power imbalances. The employers have all the power and can pay people as little as they can get away with. The flaw in this argument comes from that pesky phrase, as little as they can get away with. I'm inclined to agree with that phrase as much as you should agree with mine, which mirrors it. An employee will accept the offer that pays him as much as he can get away with. Does that mean the employee is exploiting the employer? Obviously not. That is simply what it means for there to be a free market. The demonization of employers is frankly sad to see, as the proper response when someone makes you better off is to say thank you, not to call them an exploiter. When an employee takes a job, he is doing so because it is the best option available to him. If he were better off working for himself, he would do so, but the fact he instead takes a job shows he believes it makes him better off. Third parties who propose that the employee is being exploited are making the incredibly arrogant assumption that they have a better understanding of the employee's interests than he does himself. Number 3. Employers only employ workers because they can earn a margin on the product of their labor. Well, hey, now you're starting to catch on to this whole capitalism thing. But pause for a moment and think about the employee. Isn't he also earning a margin from his relationship with his employer? Presumably, if he could make just as much money working for himself as for his employer, he would choose the former. After all, why risk being in a position of being fired by someone else if you can earn the same amount of money on your own? So the employee must be taking the position because there is a marginal improvement for him as well. This may be because the employer is providing him with capital that improves his productivity. For example, a logging worker may be able to split more wood with the log splitter provided by his employer compared to his own axe. So yes, you're right. Employers employ people to earn a margin on the products of their labor. Maybe they produce $21 worth of goods or services per hour, and the employer pays them $19 per hour. But if the alternative was the worker only producing $14 worth of goods per hour on his own, then it would be hard to argue the employer did anything immoral by hiring the worker, even if he earns the margin between the worker's productivity and his wage. But the margin is too high. By what standard? The margin is set by the market. If the margin is extraordinarily high for software engineers, more firms will enter the market to bid up the price of labor for software engineers. After all, if you were a software engineer and you figured out your employer was making $500,000 from your labor, but only paying you $200,000, you would probably look for work elsewhere, start working as an independent contractor, bootstrap your own firm, or try to raise money from investors to start another software development firm. You aren't getting it. The margin should be zero. If firms were legally required to have no margin between their employees' productivity and their wages, then no one would hire anyone, since it wouldn't benefit them. This would leave everyone worse off. Number 4. All right, you've made some good points, but what about the high-income earners who don't save and just consume? Shouldn't the government prohibit consumption spending above a certain amount? The short answer is no, but I'm starting to like the way you're thinking. When you tax something, you get less of it. Place a tax on cigarettes, expect less smoking. Place a tax on apples, expect people to buy fewer of them. Place a tax on work, such as an income tax, and expect less work. Place a tax on investment income and expect less investment. See the pattern? So if we wanted to reduce consumption and thereby promote saving and investment, we could place a tax on it. This would make far more sense than taxing things that benefit the economy, such as work and investment. So if you wanted to replace taxes on income and capital gains with a consumption tax, I'd be totally on board. But to answer your initial question, the government wouldn't be helping anyone by setting a legal cap on consumption spending. A high-wage worker who wants to work for an hour to earn money to spend on consumption should be free to do so. A law limiting consumption spending would just result in high-wage workers not working the extra hours since they wouldn't reap their desired reward from it. This would leave both customers and the worker worse off, with less production and consumption overall. Having now discussed income inequality, the argument for wealth inequality is rather simple. Different people will earn different amounts of money throughout their lives and will choose to spend and save at different rates and at different times. This will naturally result in wealth inequality. And because of compound interest, the gap in wealth between two people may be far greater than the gap between their incomes. In fact, some people with lower incomes may have more wealth than those with higher incomes simply due to consuming less and investing more. Obviously, any laws that arbitrarily restrict the investment options available to specific groups of people would be unjust. However, in the absence of such laws, it is hard to find any reason to believe wealth inequality is objectionable. Conclusion. Inequality is a necessary consequence of allowing free people to make free decisions. Those desiring perfect income and wealth equality should at least be honest about the loss of freedom under such a regime. And yes, it would have to be a regime, as perfect equality is unnatural. The desire to bring people out of absolute poverty is a good one, but frankly, I do not think that is the motivation behind the most zealous of redistributionists. Rather, I suspect their motivation is rooted in envy, and until their hearts change, I do not expect any of these arguments to convince them.